Let me ask you, did you, on November 13th, 2022, enter the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder?
Yes.
Yes. It's just one word, but it's chilling. The man behind one of the most infamous murder cases in recent memory just gave the answer no one expected. And with that, the case takes a stunning turn. So, what led to Bryan Kohberger's shocking guilty plea? I'm Chris. Let's recap. Bryan Kohberger's plea deal came out of nowhere. After years of claiming innocence, after all the motions, the hearings, the back and forth, he finally sat in court and admitted it.
Let me ask you, did you, on November 13th, 2022, enter the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder?
Yes.
Did you, on November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, kill and murder Madison Mogan, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
Did you, on or about that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Kaylee Goncalves, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
And did you, on that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
And then on or about November 13th, 2022, again in Latah County, Idaho, did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
Did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice of forethought?
Yes.
Guilty to all 4 University of Idaho murders. And here's the twist. By pleading guilty, the death penalty is off the table. In exchange, he's staring down 4 life sentences to be served consecutively without the chance of parole. No appeals. That was part of the deal. He had to give up any shot at fighting this later. As part of the plea, Bryan handed over a written factual basis. Basically, his signed confession putting in writing exactly what he admitted to in court. In the hearing, the prosecutor walked the court through the evidence, laying it all out and even dropping a few new details about the night of the murders. But one thing is still missing: a motive.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the organization of the resuscitation is different than what I think the court and the public may be familiar with from the probable cause affidavit and other documents. The state's evidence, as an overview, would show that back in March of 2022, when the defendant was residing in his parents' residence or was residing back in Pennsylvania, his home state, he purchased online a K-bar knife and sheath with an Amazon gift card that he had purchased shortly prior to the purchase of the knife, sheath, and sharpener. Jumping ahead, the end of June of that year, the defendant, Mr. Kohberger, moved from Pennsylvania to Pullman, Washington, which is right across the state line from Moscow, Idaho, for the purpose of pursuing a PhD in criminal justice at Washington State University. The state's evidence would indicate that beginning July 9th of 2022, Mr. Kohberger's phone began connecting to a cell tower that serves the area of the 1122 King Road residence in Moscow, Idaho.
If you caught Dateline's episode, The Terrible Night on King Road, or our recap, you might remember this chilling detail. Back in July 2022, Bryan shows up at a pool party in Moscow, and according to the prosecutor's timeline, that's when he starts hunting. Between July and the murders in November, Bryan's phone pings near the victim's house 23 times, always late at night between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m.
In the interim, on August 22nd of 2022, Latah County Sheriff's Deputy Darren Duke conducted a traffic stop in the early morning hour or late evening hours, about 11 p.m. On the west side of Moscow, on the Moscow-Pullman Road. This was the traffic stop of Mr. Kohberger's car, which turned out to be a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plates. During the course of the traffic stop, Deputy Duke was able to obtain Mr. Kohberger's name, Bryan Kohberger, his phone number, and his address, which at that point was an apartment address in Pullman.
In the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, surveillance cameras spot Bryan's white Hyundai Elantra circling the 1122 King Road area. It starts around 3:30 a.m. Bryan's car entering and leaving that dead-end street over and over. Then, at 4:05 a.m., he stops at the intersection of King and Queen Road, flips a U-turn, drives back to the house, and parks up behind it, watching.
The state believes that its evidence would then show that the defendant entered the residence of 1122 through the kitchen sliding door on the back side of the residence, which is the side of the residence that would face the area above where the defendant's car was parked. Defendant entered the residence, went to the third floor, and with a knife, killed Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves. The defendant, as he left that room, for whatever reason, ended up leaving, or the sheath for a K-bar knife was left on the bed next to Madison Mogan's body.
According to Dateline's law enforcement source, the theory goes like this. Bryan wasn't expecting Kaylee Goncalves to be in that bed. She'd already moved out after graduating early, but she was back that weekend visiting her best friend Maddie. Kaylee? She fights back. Hard enough that Xana Kernodle, who's still awake, scrolling TikTok and waiting for her DoorDash, hears the commotion. She goes to check it out and catches Bryan by surprise. He chases her back to her room, and in the chaos, he loses his knife sheath.
And I can jump ahead. That sheath was tested by the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab, and single source male DNA was found on the snap of that sheath, as well as blood from both Kaylee and Madison and other trace evidence. But it's important to note single source male DNA was on the snap of that sheath.
Bryan stabs Xana to death in her room, then turns on her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, who's asleep in her bed. He kills him too, but here's where it gets even more disturbing. According to Dateline's insider, Bryan does something strange. He allegedly carves up Ethan's legs. Why he did it or what exactly that means still isn't clear. But with 4 people dead in just minutes, he sits down to rest in a chair in Xana's room, leaving behind a bloody seat print.
I will state for the record that there is no evidence there was any sexual component or sexual assault on any of the victims. I want to make that clear so there's no speculation.
Then Bryan heads back toward the sliding glass door, ready to slip out. But here's the chilling part. There are still 2 other roommates in the house.
During the course of this, one of those roommates awoke, looked out her door not knowing what was going on, and saw the defendant, who was dressed in black with a black balaclava on, holding some sort of container in his hand. And she saw him leave the house through the direction of the kitchen where that sliding door is that I mentioned before.
That container he mentioned, the roommate told police it looked like he was carrying a vacuum-type object. Police say it was probably Bryan's large K-bar knife. And honestly, it's a good thing she couldn't see it clearly, because if she had screamed or even said a word to him, experts say she might not have made it out alive either.
At approximately 4:20 that morning, so this would have been 15 minutes or so later, the defendant's car is seen on a surveillance camera for 1112 King Road, which is immediately next door to the west of 1122, leaving the area at a high rate of speed. And if the court were to see that, or anybody in this courtroom would see that, you can see the car almost loses control as it makes the corner, heads north, and then turns to go south on Walinta, which is one of the only ways to get out of that part of town. The evidence would show that following that, the defendant in his Elantra drove south of Moscow. We know that he drove on the back roads because there are surveillance cameras on the main highways, Highway 95, that would have picked up the defendant's car if he'd gone that route. And they did not show the defendant's car on that route during the time. So we know that he went through a variety of back roads in very rural, isolated part of Latah County. About 4:48 that morning, the defendant's phone comes back on. And The evidence will show that that phone was located south of Moscow, likely at a side road intersection with Highway 95. From there, the defendant's phone activity tracks it heading back north towards Pullman, Washington, where the defendant lived.
Not long after he gets home, he starts making calls. At 6:17 a.m., Bryan makes 3 calls to a number registered to his father. That's according to Dateline's Insider. And get this, each call lasted between 30 and 54 minutes. But here's the thing, that number, it's part of a family plan. So investigators have no idea who actually picked up or what was said. Prosecutors had planned to put some of Bryan's own family members on the stand at trial, but now that he's pled guilty, we might never know what was said on those calls.
Later that morning, this Sunday, the 13th of November of 2022, Mr. Kohberger's phone returned to the area of King Road. We don't know exactly what he did, but it returned to that area. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. He was there for about 10 minutes and then returned to his Pullman residence. About 9:30, the state's evidence will show, evidence taken from the defendant's phone, that he took a selfie of himself on his phone in what appears to be the bathroom of his Pullman apartment with a thumbs up.
That photo, Bryan grinning, giving a thumbs up, it's even more disturbing after hearing him finally admit he murdered them, don't you think?
The defendant's phone then went to the Lewiston-Clarkston Valley, approximately 30 miles south of Moscow and Pullman. And the defendant is actually seen with his car at various businesses down there. This area is the confluence of the Clearwater River and the Snake River. Lewiston is Idaho's seaport. Large bodies of moving water down there.
The prosecutor didn't go so far as to say it outright, but the general consensus, Bryan dumped evidence in those waters, most likely the murder weapon and who knows what else.
The state's evidence will show that following Sunday, November 13th, 2022, business records show that the defendant began searching for a K-bar knife and a K-bar knife sheath, as the state believes, to replace the one that was left at the scene of the murders. The evidence also will suggest that there were at least attempts by the defendant to delete or alter his purchase history on Amazon, where all these transactions had occurred.
Later that week, he went to the DMV to switch his car registration from Pennsylvania to Washington. Why does that matter? Well, Pennsylvania cars don't need a front license plate, and the car caught on those surveillance cameras, no front plate. That little detail raised a lot of red flags with investigators.
Mr. Kohberger proceeded to finish his semester of studies at Washington State University and returned to Pennsylvania for the holidays. Law enforcement at this point were aware of Mr. Kohberger, had been accessing information about him, were trying to find him. They located him in Pennsylvania, and they conducted what's called a trash pull. During the nighttime hours, agents of the FBI, who assisted immensely with this case, working with the sanitation department back in this neighborhood in Pennsylvania, took trash that had been set out on the street for collection, sent the contents of that from the Pennsylvania residence of the defendant's parents to the Idaho State Forensic Laboratory, where the lab experts there were able to identify DNA on a Q-tip as coming from the father of the person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath that was next to Madison Logan's body in the bed.
On the night of his arrest, December 30th, 2022, while he was at his parents' house in Pennsylvania, Bryan searched for and played one song on repeat, a remix of Criminal by Britney Spears. Crazy detail, right?
I can tell the court, in public, the weapon itself, the knife, has not yet been recovered. I can tell the court that the defendant's apartment in Pullman was searched, as well as his office. Spartan would be a kind characterization. There was virtually nothing there. Nothing of evidentiary value was found. And of course, we are now talking 6-8 weeks after the time of the killings. In Pennsylvania, the defendant's car was seized, and it was actually pretty much disassembled internally. And it also had been cleaned. There was a bucket of cleaner right beside it. I think we can all look to our own cars, you know, in those compartments in the doors. You can try to keep them clean where you put stuff. There's always some degree of crud in there. They were spotless. The defendant's car had been meticulously cleaned inside. And the state would present to the jury that that was part of the defendant's plan in covering up this. The defendant has studied crime. In fact, he did a detailed paper on crime scene processing when he was working on his pre-doctorate degrees, and he had that knowledge and skill.
So what made Bryan finally admit it? Why now? For almost 3 years, his defense fought tooth and nail, filing motion after motion, trying to chip away at the state's evidence. And the whole time, Bryan insisted he was innocent. He claimed he was out driving, just looking at the stars that night. But when it came to backing that up, no witnesses, no proof. Then everything shifted. Bryan took the plea deal just days after the judge shut down his last-ditch attempt to delay the trial, a motion made after Dateline dropped some of those secret case details. The judge also shut down his team's attempt to float an alternative killer theory at trial. But why did the state offer him a deal with so much evidence on their side? Well, we don't know for sure. Experts say the prosecution might have done it to save money on a trial in this high-profile case. But here's the thing. This deal comes with no special conditions beyond agreeing not to appeal and serving life without parole. Bryan does not have to explain why he did it or why he targeted them. No motive, which means the victims' families are still left in the dark. Ethan Chapin's family and Maddie's dad say they're at peace with it. But Kaylee's father, Steve Goncalves, he's furious, calling out the Idaho legal system for offering Bryan this deal. Xana Kernodle's family? Looks like they're feeling the same frustration. And with all this outrage around the plea deal, there's been another big question floating around. Could Bryan actually profit off these murders? A lot of people have asked if Idaho has a Son of Sam law, you know, the kind that stops killers from cashing in on their crimes with book deals or paid interviews. Well, Idaho doesn't have that exact law, but they do have a statute that makes sure any money tied to the crimes goes into an escrow account for the victims' families. So if he ever tries to sell his story, he won't see a dime. Bryan Kohberger will be sentenced on July 23rd, and when that day comes, the victims' families will finally get their chance to speak. They'll deliver their impact statements right there in court. But what about you? Is this justice? Is it enough for Bryan to spend the rest of his life behind bars? Let's talk about it in the comments. Thanks for watching All the Crime in Half the Time. I'm Chris. Amy and I are here 3 times a week with new recaps, so don't leave without hitting like and subscribe so you never miss a thing. Until next time, take care.